From the very moment that Samson was born, there was never any doubt who or what he was to be. From the very first words that we're introduced to Samson in Judges 13, we're told this. It was laid out. An angel announces to his mother that she will give birth to a son, and it says, the boy is to be a Nazarite, set apart to God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. He would have great strength. His life would have purpose. It would have meaning. He would be a great warrior for God. He would bring justice. He would be a defender of the weak. He would have very special talents and gifts that God would give him for a very special task that he was to give him. The future looked bright. The sky was the limit. Nothing could hold him back. The only thing that could stop Samson was himself. And that's exactly what we see happen. Is that through a series of bad decisions, self-destructive decisions, that his life takes a terrible turn all through his life. Now, we talked about some of the attitudes that led to very poor decisions that he made, self-destructive decisions that he made at the very first week. And then the next week we talked some about how to replace those attitudes. But what we want to do today is this. We want to look at another area that led to the problems. And I think you'll see they tie to the bad attitudes. But what led to so many of the bad problems and decisions? And that's simply this. Samson was emotion-driven. Samson was driven by his emotions. And that's where we're going to spend our time, that one thought today, that he was driven by emotions. And when you look up the definition to emotion, it's just simply, the base definition is a strong feeling. Now, you can add more to that. You can define emotionally or emotions or things like it, but it's always going to come back to a strong feeling. And there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean it's bad, doesn't mean it's good. Men, generally, we don't think that we're emotional. We think that women are the ones who deal with emotions. But men, I want to ask you a question. As you found yourself getting older, do you find yourself getting more emotional? Yeah? Okay, I'm the only one. Okay. Somebody told me the other day, I can't even remember who it was, but they said they walked out of the house and said, well, I'm officially an old man. I just cried over a TV commercial. And I can identify with that. The older you get, the more you're emotional about these things. But a life without emotions would be pretty dull, wouldn't it? And if we didn't have those emotions, and all of us have had emotions, emotional moments that caused us to make some bad decisions. Everything from just something we said to something we did, something we purchased, all of those things that later we said, what was I thinking? And you may have backed out of the garage today and went past an emotional decision. On your way here, a boat or a motorcycle. You may have drove here in an emotional decision. Don't look around, but you may be sitting beside an emotional decision right now. Don't look. I said don't look. Today, we're going to go to Judges 14. That's where we're going to spend our time. Judges chapter 14. And we're going to move quickly through some verses here. But what we're going to do is and as you're turning there, I'll just set the stage. We're going to build on a story that we started with the first week. Samson has found a woman he wants to marry. Problem is, she's a Philistine. God had forbid the Israelites to marry the Philistines because they worship false gods, very evil gods, and he didn't want them intermarrying with them. But this didn't stop Samson. So he gets his father and mother, and they go down to arrange the wedding. On the way down, you remember, a lion attacks Samson. It says in the scripture there that Samson kills the lion with his bare hands and leaves it. And then he goes on another trip down. They arrange the wedding, go back on another trip down for the actual wedding and the wedding feast. He checks on the lion carcass. He wants to see, if the lion is still there that he killed. And he finds the carcass, but honeybees had built a nest, a hive in there. And so he takes some of the honey and eats it. and shares some with his parents. Well, when he gets down to the wedding feast, and the way the weddings were done in that part of the world, it was a week-long thing. It was a feast that lasted the whole week. And when he gets there, we see that he wants to have a little fun with some of the men there, the Philistines. So in Judges 14, starting with verse 12, it says this. "Let me tell you a riddle," Samson said to them. "If you give me the answer within the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. If you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes." "Tell us your riddle," they said. "Let's hear it." He replied, "Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet." For 3 days they could not give the answer. And we know the answer because it's the lion and the honey in the lion. Now, why did Samson want to do this? We're not told, but I just kind of have to wonder if he wanted to appear maybe smarter than they were. Maybe when, you know how sometimes we tend to think of somebody that's very strong, very muscular, very athletic, that they're not very mentally strong. I get that all the time. Maybe he was trying to overcompensate. Maybe he's trying to overcompensate for that. We don't know. It doesn't tell. But he makes this wager. Verse 15. "On the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, 'Coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to rob us?'" Now, they take this thing. This is very serious. It's not just a male emotion, but men, we know we have to really guard against this thing. But when something comes to a competition like that, when there's something that we could lose, we hate to lose. We hate to think that someone is better than us. They've got something over on us. And it can cause us to do some very crazy things. And we'll see that in Samson. We see it in the Philistine men here. I think about just a few weeks ago, we saw where the Little League World Series, the ones who won the United States World Little League Championship and then went and played for the World Series, they had their title stripped from them because it became clear that they had broken the rules by recruiting players outside of what the boundaries of where you could get players, the neighborhood that they could take players from. We do crazy things when it comes to we thought that we're going to lose. Verse 16. "Then Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, 'You hate me. You don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer.' 'I haven't even explained it to my father or mother,' he replied. 'So why should I explain it to you?'" Not a good answer, is it? No. Verse 17. "She cried the whole 7 days of the feast. So on the 7th day, he finally told her because she continued to press him. She in turn explained the riddle to her people." Ladies, really? We don't handle tears very well. But I guess it's just another illustration of how we can use our emotions and how emotions can manipulate us, how it goes both ways here. Verse 18, "Before sunset, on the 7th day, the men of the town said to him, 'What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?' Samson said to them, 'If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would have not solved my riddle.'" Men, young men, lend me your ears. Number one, you shouldn't be betting. You shouldn't be making wagers. And number two, if you lose, under no circumstances, said in the sweetest way, ever refer to your woman as a heifer. It will not work out. It never turns out. Everything up to this point has been about emotions, hasn't it? Everything has been about emotions. But it gets more bizarre. This is just the beginning. It's just going to get completely out of hand. Judges 14, 19, and 20 says this. "Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. He went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of their belongings, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. Burning with anger, hang on to that phrase, burning with anger, he went up to his father's house. Sounds like a brat, doesn't it? You know, I'm just going to leave. He leaves his own wedding and goes back home. And Samson's wife was given to the friend who had attended him at his wedding. We see it move from just an emotional thing, emotions driving, to now it says he's burning with anger. Now, I don't know anything about the men that he went and killed. All we know is that they were Philistines. They were the enemies of God, enemies of Israel. But we're going to see that this very act leads to a lot of trouble for Israel and for Samson. He leaves, goes back home, leaves his own wedding feast. And the father says, well, we've got a wedding, but no groom. I've spent all this money for her wedding, and now I have no groom. And so was the custom. He gave his daughter to basically what you'd say the best man, one of the friends that was there attending him. So Samson goes back not knowing what has taken place here. Well, like every one of us who throw a temper tantrum at some time or another, we get over it eventually, and we expect everything to be normal after that. We expect everything to be normal after the temper tantrum and nobody to hold anything against us. So Samson eventually goes back down to his wife there. Judges 15, we've gone over into the next chapter. Judges 15, 1 through 3 says this. Later on, at the time of wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. Men, lend me your ears. Young men, don't bet. Don't refer to your woman as a heifer. And if you go to make up, don't carry a goat. Think of something. I guess it's original, but I don't think it's going to go well. He carries her a goat, and he says he went to visit his wife. He said, I'm going to my wife's room. But her father would not let him go in. I was so sure you thoroughly hated her, he said, that I gave her to your friend. Now, isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead. Samson said to them, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them. You see, the snowball it's just starting to roll here. Now Samson goes out and he sets fire to the wheat fields and burns their wheat fields up. The Philistines come and say, who did it? They know that Samson did it, and they go to the home of what they consider his wife, and they kill her and kill the father. Samson comes back there, and then after this has happened, in Judges 15:7, it says, since you have acted like this, I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. Can you see how big the snowball is getting here? It's completely out of control now. Now we not only see him burning with anger, we see him controlled. He is controlled with pride and revenge. He is not going to stop. He can't stop at this point. His anger set in motion, coupled with pride and revenge, it says, I must win. It's an all-out war now. Now promise me this. I am going through this so fast. I want to ask you this today, this afternoon, tonight before you go to bed, go back and just read what we're going through here very quickly so you can take it all in again. Please do that. But what happens here is that he goes out, kills more men, and then says, well, it's about time for me to get out of town. And he goes back to his country and hides in a cave. Well, the Philistines are not going to let this go, so they get an army and come over to Israel, to Judah, there, and they say to the local people, we've come to get Samson, or you're hiding him. And they go to where Samson's at and say, what have you done to us? Now they're bringing an army against us. We can't fight against them. And Samson makes a deal with him and says, promise me I'll go out, you hand me over to him, just don't kill me yourself. So they tie him up, take him out, and Well, let me back up. Let me just back up here to verse 11. This is another thing. He says, when they say to him, "What have you done?" Does this what he says? He says, "I merely did to them what they did to me." He's justifying everything. Okay, they take Samson out. He breaks loose. The only thing that he could find was a jawbone of a donkey and begins to fight. And before the battle is over, when the battle is over, it says that he had killed 1,000 men with this jawbone. Verse 16, then Samson said, "With a donkey's jawbone I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone I have killed 1,000 men." Now there's one more little hint there. He says, I have done this. Appears to me he's totally forgotten where his power came from to start with. Do you think Samson has a problem with pride? Do you think Samson has a problem with being emotion-driven? I think it's so obvious. But this is where I want to kind of move away from the specific sins of Samson and just look at emotions altogether. Because when we're driven by our emotions, this is key. When we're driven by our emotions, we become slaves to our emotions. We become prisoners of our emotions. You see, we all have default mechanisms. What we default to, what we go to when we're not even thinking about it, it's what we're trained, what we go to, what just happens. Heard the story this week of a preacher. His wife had given him a bicycle, and he was out riding, and he didn't really enjoy it, but his wife had given it to him, so he's out riding, and he comes up on a little boy that's mowing the grass. I had just finished mowing the grass, and he stopped to talk to him, and he said, "Man, that yard really looks good." He said, "Yeah, this is a great lawnmower." He said, "I tell you what," he said, "I've been wanting to get a lawnmower." The little boy said, "I've been wanting to get a bicycle." He said, "You want to trade?" And so they traded. And he went off on the bicycle, and he pushed the mower back to his house. Well, the next week came, and he wanted to mow his grass, went out and pulled. Would not start. Pulled and pulled, and just could not get the mower to start. Little boy just happened to come riding by on the bicycle. He said, "Son, you sold me a lawnmower that doesn't work." He said, "Oh, it'll work." He said, "You just got to lay a good cussing on it." He said, "Son," do you know who I am? He says, "I am a preacher. I'm a man of God. I'm a follower of Jesus. It's been so long since I cussed, I don't even know how to." Little boy said, "You pull on that mower a little bit longer. It'll come back to you." That's a default mechanism. That's what we go back to. And in the moment of crisis, what is our default mechanism? Is that our emotions? Is it pride? Is it anger? Is it jealousy? Is it lust? Is it selfishness? It can be a whole list of things. Or it can be that our default mechanism is to go back to, what would God have me do? What would Jesus do here? Does Jesus show up at the default mechanism, or does it just your emotions? I heard it put this way this week. I was reading, and so I never thought of it this way. But all of us have a main character in our story. We all have a story to tell. Our life is a story, but who is the main character in our story? If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, if you've accepted Him as your Lord and Savior, you are no longer the main character. God is the main character. Jesus is the main character in your story. And if you haven't accepted that yet, and you're still fighting to be the main character in the story about your life, then there's always going to be a struggle. There's always going to be strife. This instantly came to my mind this week when Brian Williams, the NBC newscaster, that you remember he's gotten in trouble because he started telling stories that he had reported on, that he told that he was a part of the story. And then I couldn't got interested in the things on the internet. People have got more time than I do. If you can notice, they've got Brian Williams in the Bronco with O.J. Simpson. He's there with Abraham Lincoln. He landed on the moon. All of these things. He's at Iwo Jima with the raising of the flag. And it's funny, but it's so sad that a man has ruined his whole reputation because he wasn't satisfied being in the story or having the honor of telling the story. He wanted to be the story. And all of us have a story to tell. But in our story, are we fighting to be the main character? Paul showed his heart when he said this, his heart about how he feels about Christ. In Galatians 2:20, he said this, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And the life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Paul is saying less of me and more of him. Let there be every day be less and less of me in this story and more of him. Paul is saying, I want, like we said last week, I want to know Christ. He says, I've actually been crucified with Christ. And Christ now is the one who lives in me. Emotions are God-given. As we said before, they're a part of life. Life would be pretty dull if we didn't have them. They add spice to life. But when we are ruled by our emotions, when our decisions are made by emotion, then we are at the mercy of emotions. And this is key too. We're at the mercy of whoever can play on our emotions. Whoever can play on our emotions. And we don't defeat the emotions by just simply trying harder. We get them in the right order because we train. We train in the right way. When we're controlled by the truth and we're controlled by the Spirit of God, by what is good and what is right and what is godly. Paul put it very well for us. When Paul was writing to the Ephesians, he was very disturbed that they were so wishy-washy on their faith, and how they could be drug away from the faith and follow all these different teachings and everything. And he didn't want to see them being taken back and forth. He wanted them to stand firm. And he said it to them this way, and I think it can apply to our emotions. Ephesians 4:14 says this, then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves, and blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by the cunning and craftiness of men and their deceitful scheming. Boy, can we apply that to our emotions? That if we allow our emotions not to rule us, not to guide us, that we won't be pulled here and there, but in those default times and those decision times, that we don't let them, the emotions are there, but they don't rule us. God rules us because we want Him to get the glory. We want our lives to reflect His glory. Simple message. Simple message today about what emotions can do, what they did to Samson, and what they can do to us. The emotions are there. We just have to make sure they don't rule us, they don't control us.